All right, Alexander, let's talk about either a coup in Ukraine or a Maidan 3. Actually, that is what Arestovich said the other day. He said there is either a coup coming or a Maidan 3. Now, Zelensky, in an interview he gave maybe 2 weeks ago, he talked about how the Russians are planning a Maidan 3 to overthrow his government. An admission that Maidan 1 and 2 was indeed an overthrow of a democratically elected government. And Dmitry Medvedev, he pointed that out. But he said the Russians are planning a Maidan 3. But you now have a lot of talk about some sort of change in the government, a regime change, a coup d'etat. Something is happening in Ukraine. It looks like you have Zelensky and his team, Zelensky, Podolyak, Yermak on one side. It seems like you have Zaluzhny, I would say Klitschko now, perhaps Poroshenko, and some other oligarchs, perhaps, on the Zaluzhny military side. And then you also have the Budanov SPU intel, which it's hard to say where exactly they're tilting towards. You had this poisoning incident of Mariana Budanov, and perhaps the Budanov is just kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens. Maybe he wants to seize power. Who knows? But something is happening in Ukraine. Maybe we won't have a coup or a Maidan 3. Maybe Zelensky will get certain intel from Budanov and he'll be able to prevent something like that happening. But I think it's pretty safe to say now that plots are being hatched.
Plots are being hatched, and they are clearly moving to some kind of an event, some kind of a showdown. Now, can I just say, of course, it's very interesting that Arestovich talks about Maidan 3 as an alternative to a coup. Most people would say that Maidan 2 was a coup. But anyway, there we go. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, how do you remove from office against his will a constitutionally elected president and claims that this is not a coup? I mean, it's presumably some sort of a coup. I mean, he's not suggesting, as far as I can tell, an impeachment process, which apparently the Ukrainian system would make extremely difficult. So, one way or the other, what Arestovich is talking about is a coup. Either a coup, which is the normal classical coup, troops on the streets, police people rounding up prisoners, that kind of thing, the kind of coup that we're familiar with from Latin America and other places. Or alternatively, he's talking about another kind of coup, protests in the streets, squares being occupied, that kind of thing. But
I think
again,
that's the distinction. Yeah,
that's the distinction.
That's the distinction he's trying to make. Yeah,
exactly,
whether it's military guys or whether it's going to be people on Maidan Square.
Exactly. And by the way, we are already seeing small protests so far, but they are growing in Kiev. They're there all the time. Even the British media is picking them up now. People are, demanding rotation of their loved ones who are in the army and that kind of thing. And they're apparently appearing on the Kiev subway. All kinds of things of that kind. But put that aside. Let's not talk about the mechanics of this. It's absolutely clear that there is now a growing movement within the Ukrainian political military leadership to try to get Zelensky out. And they're all of them looking for ways to do it. They haven't yet settled on a way. And Zelensky is very well aware of this, and he wants to remain where he is. You've had his wife saying that she doesn't want him to stay as president for another term, which you could argue is that she's trying to persuade her husband to bend to all this pressure, to step down. I mean, that's what it looked like to me. But Zelensky himself appears determined to stay. I think the people around him, people like Yermak, Podolyak, and the others, also obviously want him to stay. And a couple of days ago, Zelensky went on this very strange and mysterious tour of the various military people on the front lines. He went to Kherson, he went to Kupiansk, he met with all the generals, he announced he came back and made an announcement about Ukraine building fortifications. It was all very muddled and not entirely clear, but it looked as if he was saying that Ukraine is going to go onto the defensive from this point on. My own sense is that he was going to the military, trying to shore up support with them, and that he didn't speak to Zelensky, who's clearly he sees, and probably rightly, as one of the key plotters. But my impression was that what he was doing was telling the military, look, back me. What is your price? And the military said, look, the soldiers, the generals said, look, if you want us to back you, the minimum thing you have to do is to stop these offensives, these attacks. Let us go on the defensive. We're just frittering away our resources by doing that. So Zelensky, who up to this point has insisted on attacks being conducted on every part of the front lines, went back to Kiev after meeting these military people, and as part of whatever deal or attempted deal he tried to close with them, agreed that Ukraine is on the defensive from this point on and is going to try and build fortified lines. More difficult to do, by the way, than say, but that is what it looked like to me. Of course, whatever deal Zelensky thinks he's cut with the generals might not really be a deal at all in their eyes. We'll just have to see how it all plays out. But clearly, lots of things are going on. You've got rumours swirling around. You have MPs from Zelensky's party sniping all the time at Zelensky. There's clear indications that Zelensky wants to sack Zelensky because he clearly sees Zelensky as the chief plotter. You also get rumours and speculations about what Zelensky himself is up to. Zelensky is keeping very, very quiet. He wasn't at this meeting with the other generals, and there's been reports of telephone conversations between Poroshenko and the former president, who's also an oligarch, and another big Ukrainian oligarch, Rinat Akhmetov, who I believe is not physically in Ukraine at the moment. But anyway, lots of things moving on. The chessboard is moving, and clearly there is within Kiev now a consensus amongst perhaps the predominant bloc within the Ukrainian establishment that Zelensky has to go.
Is that conversation confirmed? I mean, I think it's 50-50.
No, it's not.
Poroshenko
No, it's
and
not.
Akhmetov.
It's not. It's not confirmed. I have to say this. I've listened to it. I'm slightly leaning to the view that it's genuine, and there's two reasons. Firstly, if you are going to have a conversation, Poroshenko trying to sort of carry out a coup, and you wanted to fabricate it, would you really fabricate it by having a person like Akhmetov? Wouldn't you be having Poroshenko talking to a military or intelligence person, something of that kind? So that's one thing. The second is that Akhmetov himself seems to be very unwilling to join the coup. And again, that does make me wonder whether, you would, if you were looking to fabricate a conversation, you would do it in quite this kind of way. It did make me wonder, by the way, whether it might be Akhmetov himself who was recording the conversation. I mean, it's that kind of complex business that, is taking place in Ukraine at the moment. People are maneuvering, and there's plots going on. There was the incident about 2 weeks ago of the man who pulled a pin from the grenade and got himself blown up on his birthday. And there was the poisoning of Budanov's wife.
Zelensky's assistant, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Zelensky's assistant.
So he's on the Zelensky side, yeah.
He's on the Zelensky side. He got blown up with a grenade, which is given to him. I mean, it's a very bizarre incident, which has not been properly explained. Then there was the fact that Budanov's wife was poisoned. And this does look like a real assassination attempt. All kinds of things are going on. And it seems to me that this conversation between Poroshenko and Akhmetov fits fully within that. And somebody has leaked it. It might have been the Russians who are probably listening into all these conversations. It might have been Akhmetov himself. But it does make it pretty obvious, if it is true, which on balance I think it is, that Poroshenko is engaging in some kind of a plot himself.
Yeah, well, Poroshenko tried to leave Ukraine and he was denied. And he says he was going to go to Poland to talk about the trucker blockade, and then talk to American officials about getting money into the Ukraine government. Nonsense.
Nonsense. I mean, he's clearly what he's clearly wanted to do was to go away and lobby with the Americans for his coup. I mean, that's clearly what this is all about.
It's crystal clear.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's obviously trying to drum up international support. Maybe there are people that want him. I mean, I think that's the big question. What people, what countries, what governments, what organizations, what officials in the collective West are lobbying for Zelensky to go? You know, maybe they wanted to meet with Poroshenko to see how things are going. Are you progressing in your little attempt to remove Zelensky? I mean, are we talking about people in the EU? Are we talking about people in the United States? Three-letter agencies, the Polish officials? Who could be lobbying various oligarchs and parliament officials and military officials to remove Zelensky?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think the first thing to say is that any kind of coup in Kiev is not perhaps impossible, but becomes incredibly difficult if the Western governments were to decide that they still wanted Zelensky to remain in place. I mean, they basically control the political situation in Kiev. So for a coup to succeed or to have any realistic chance of success, it would need some support from some government in the West. Now, my own sense is that if there's going to be an attempt to remove Zelensky, the initiative must be coming from people in the United States. And you can see why. We've had that article about 3 weeks ago in Newsweek that they were saying that the United States is telling Zelensky that negotiations have to be opened with the Russians now by the end of the year. If that doesn't happen, then consequences will follow. Zelensky's ruling out negotiations. He's ruling out elections. He's closing off, if you like, lines to do what the Americans, according to this Newsweek article, want him to do. And it could be the case, in fact, it plausibly is the case, that if there is an attempt to get Zelensky out, the initiative is coming partly from Ukraine, but also from some people in Washington. And then a couple of days ago, I think it was in the London Times, there was another article which said that the US and Germany are now limiting supplies of weapons to Ukraine in order to get Ukraine to agree to negotiations. And we know that Zelensky is refusing to conduct negotiations. So if that report is also true, and I have my doubts about that one, by the way, but if it is also true, then again, it could be that, you know, some people in Germany are also involved in this, that they also understand that Zelensky has exhausted his potential, if they to put it in the kind of way that they would say it, and that they're also involved in trying to leverage him out. Now, I have to say there are other people in Europe especially who are heavily invested in Zelensky as an individual, and I think they might find it very, very difficult to endorse a coup.
Ursula.
Or he's in Ursula, exactly. Ursula.
Annalena.
Joseph, the British government, all of those people. So I'm far from convinced that this is that the collective West is necessarily united behind this thing. But I am increasingly getting the feeling that the Americans are absolutely fed up with Zelensky, that they want to end this crisis in Ukraine in some way to clear the decks for the election next year, that they can see the trajectory of travel on the battlefront. And they want negotiations to begin as soon as possible. And they see Zelensky as standing in the way. And that's why they're trying to either bypass him or leverage him out. Remember, those articles that have appeared, the one in Newsweek, for example, the previous one, you remember, in Time, which said that he was delusional and messianic and all of those kind of things. The mere appearance of articles like that suggesting that the Americans are losing confidence in Zelensky would probably be reason enough in Kiev for people there to start saying to themselves, the Americans no longer have confidence in Zelensky, let's get rid of him. And it may be that some of those articles might have appeared precisely for that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, Zelensky has to stay in power because it's the only way he can survive. I mean, even if they were to cut Zelensky loose, even if he listens to his wife's advice and says, "Okay, honey, I'm not gonna be president in March 2024. I'm out," and they go and live their life, even if they let him take all the money that he's accumulated. He understands that without the protection of that seat as president in Kiev, what kind of life is he going to be living?
Yes.
I mean, he understands all of this. So the only thing he can do at the moment is sit tight, is to stay in place at all costs and see if something pops up, if something happens, if he can find some sort of exit out of this. So I mean, for him, this is about his survival, and he knows it.
It absolutely is. And if anybody has any doubt, about that, about the nature of the game that is being played, just consider the fact that one person has been blown up pulling a pin out of a hand grenade, and another person has been poisoned with heavy metals, Budanov's wife. So this is a game being played for very, very high stakes within a culture which endorses political assassinations. Remember, the Ukrainians, and I'm not making, I'm speculating now, it's been confirmed in the American media, have a long history of carrying out assassinations. They've recently carried out a few in Russia. So this is the kind of culture that we're talking about in Ukraine. Zelensky understands that very, very well. And of course, he's frightened.
Who does he trust? Does he trust Yermak? Does he trust Podolyak? Should he trust Budanov? Budanov, the man that has indirectly hinted at being the person behind all of these assassinations. And does he trust the neocons? I mean, here's a question for you. On the one hand, the neocons, they've supported Zelensky completely, and they've been pushing Zelensky to escalate as much as possible, to attack Russia as much as possible, to do whatever he can to hurt Russia. That's been the neocon plan. So they've been encouraging Zelensky, and they've been his biggest backers. But, even Lindsey Graham, even the hardest of the hardcore neocons, Lindsey Graham said 6 months ago that elections, actually Graham, Elizabeth Warren, and Blumenthal, they went to Kiev and they told, and I believe it was Newsweek, I think it was Newsweek or PBS, they said, no, Ukraine is going to have elections. They want elections because for them, they see Zelensky as a loser. In other words, we gave you all this money, we gave you all this support, we completely supported you full to win this war, and they're probably saying you didn't succeed, and so they want Zelensky out, but they don't want Zelensky out in a way where they could say regime change or coup. They wanted to make it seem, the neocons, they want to make it seem like it was a democratic process. So you got to imagine that even the hardcore neocons are have turned, not are, have turned
Yeah.
against Zelensky in a big way, and they want elections. I mean, they're on record saying they want elections because for them that was a soft way to get Zelensky out.
Well, that's
That the American people would then believe, oh, Ukraine, see, it's a democracy. What a beautiful democracy. Zelensky lost the vote. Oh, well. That's how democracies function. Evil Putin. You see how democracies function. That's what they wanted to do. And even that's now failed. So I imagine they're double angry at Zelensky because he won't leave.
Well, this is exactly correct. And can I just say, you asked me, whom does he trust? I don't think at the moment Zelensky is able to trust anybody. Perhaps the person that he still has some residual trust in is the person within his government team who many people speculate controls him. And that, of course, is Yermak, who, if you see Yermak, he towers over Zelensky, and, he does seem to dominate Zelensky as well. But, if you look at Zelensky, if you look at how he looks now, he looks exhausted and stressed and very, very frightened, I would say. This is my own feeling about how he looks. But I don't think he trusts anybody. Amongst the Western allies, I suspect, again, the people he probably still hopes might be there to provide him with some help in Kiev. The EU can't help him in Kiev, but who might still have some people in Kiev who could help him. The people he would turn to there, presumably, are the British, because, as I said, they're so heavily politically, personally, in some cases even emotionally invested in Zelensky. But I don't think he has many people any more that he can trust. As I said, he rushed to meet the generals. He's trying to get the generals on side, keep the generals on side. I think at some point over the next few weeks, he's going to make his move against Zaluzhny as well. He's going to try and blame Zaluzhny for the failure in Avdiivka, which is, getting closer by the day. Every day we get more news about how the whole situation in Avdiivka is getting, for Ukraine, worse and worse. So I think that perhaps everybody's waiting for this battle to end, the Avdiivka battle to end. And then we will see who wins the power struggle. Either Zelensky manages to sack Zaluzhny, which will be a sign that, he's probably on top in the power struggle. Or if not, if Zaluzhny is still in place, then it would suggest that the generals and the others are now starting to combine behind him. And, we could probably see some move being made against Zelensky, an overt move being made against Zelensky over the course of the next few weeks. You've been saying on your programs that Avdiivka is crucial, and I think you are absolutely right. Now, if we go to the US, their big concern is to try to avoid what happened in 1963 in Saigon, where the South Vietnamese generals got the green light from the White House, JFK's White House, to organize a coup against President Diem of South Vietnam. Diem was an increasingly unstable leader who was clearly losing support. And there was a coup, and the coup ended in Diem and his brother being murdered by the army. I think the United States would not want that to happen this time. And it's widely accepted today that the coup against Diem essentially destroyed political legitimacy in South Vietnam and was a critical factor in the eventual collapse of that country. So I think the US I think there are people in the US, in the CIA, and within the foreign policy establishment who remember that. Whether, of course, Biden remembers it, and Sullivan remembers it, and Blinken remembers it, and it's another matter. That I think there will be people like, William Burns, for example, the CIA director, who will be very, very concerned not to have something like that play out in Kiev again. But of course, when things start to move, when the squares fill up with protesters who, to be frank, in some cases will have been bussed in and might have been paid to be there. These things happen. When the streets start to fill with protesters, when armed men start to move, the whole thing becomes extremely unpredictable and can take all sorts of extraordinary turns. And it doesn't follow that the United States can then control the situation. In 1963, Kennedy made it absolutely clear to the Vietnamese generals, the South Vietnamese generals, that he did not want Diem hurt, and yet Diem was killed.
Yeah, just on a final note, I bet you the money issue is also going to be a determining factor as to which party comes out, which faction comes out on top. If Zelensky can secure the 50 billion from the EU and the 60 billion from the US or something close to that, then I imagine he's bought himself some time. But if that falls apart, I mean, people, the generals, all these people don't get their money, then I think it's game over.
Well, let me now be completely cynical about this. I think this is what is driving the whole thing at the end of the day. I mean, I can be absolutely straightforward about this. I don't think anybody in Kiev any longer seriously believes that Ukraine is going to, I mean, I say anybody within the elite, any of the people we're talking about, Poroshenko, Akhmetov, Zaluzhny, Zelensky himself, any of those people seriously believe that Ukraine is now going to win this war. I don't think that any one of them thinks this anymore. What has probably created this crisis in Kiev, or what's driving this crisis in Kiev, is that the spigot of money from the tap has now been turned off. And I think that this is really what is concerning them. So, by the way, same was true to a great extent in South Vietnam in the 60s. So they need to keep the money flowing, even if they are calculating, as many of them probably are, that, you know, sooner or later they're all going to have to leave Ukraine. They want to make me absolutely confident that when they do leave Ukraine, there's all that money in the Channel Islands, in the Turks and Caicos, in all of these other places, which they can fall back on when that happens. So for them, keeping the money flows going is the overriding priority. And I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been plots and conspiracies against Zelensky had, you know, the tap still been on because of the deteriorating situation. But the fact that the tap has now been turned off is probably what is giving this whole thing this particularly frantic quality at this time. Now, that's my take. It's a very cynical one. But, you know, if you know Ukraine, you will know that, you know, being cynical is usually being right.
Why is it cynical? I mean, it's at the end of the day, isn't it always about money?
It's been
Hasn't this whole Project Ukraine been about money at a very basic level?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. That's exactly what I think. And I think anybody who's followed Ukrainian politics over the last, not just 50, you know, not since Maidan, but going all the way back to 1991, can see that.
Yeah. You know, just on a final note, when all of this wraps up, I joke around about this, but in 5 years, there's going to be some Ukrainian lieutenant colonel who's going to end up buying football clubs in the UK. And everyone's going to sit there, scratch their head and say, where did this guy get all the money? And, you know, if you go from back far enough, you'll see that he was somewhere in the hierarchy of the Zelensky government or the Ukraine military. And now he's buying, I don't know, give me a football club. He's buying Man United or Tottenham or something, you know, and everyone's going to be like, okay, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, this is exactly correct. Can I just say, I mean, of course, with the big purchases of things in London I mean, because I lived through this. I was aware of what was going on. I was, I wasn't exactly on the cutting edge, but I knew all the people who were in Britain. Well, I knew a lot of the people who were facilitating it. The money came pouring into London after Vladimir Putin became president. That wasn't because Putin was green lighting it. Quite the opposite. It's because all the people who, the oligarchs, all the people who'd made themselves very, very rich in the 90s were starting to see that the writing was all on the wall and were taking their money out. And that was exactly what happened then. And I suspect it's exactly what we're going to be seeing, probably are already seeing playing out now. There's already an awful lot of Ukrainian money in London, by the way. Just saying.
All right. Yeah. We'll leave it there. TheDurad.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin,